Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
You're listening to the 13th episode of Genretainment, and we're your hosts, Marx
and Julie, and we're here to give you news about our favorite genre on TV, movies, web series, and everything in between. We also have interviews, this time with
George Strayton. Yeah, he's written for Hercules and Xena, and was transmedia producer for Transformers and Star Trek, and has done a number of things, including award-winning role-playing game writer. So he's going to tell us all sorts of stuff about that and some inside scoops.
Yes, and what you just heard at the beginning was a snippet from the theme song for our web series, Reality on Demand, a song composed and performed by our friend T-Shawn Hardy, and you can find our web series at realityondemandseries.com.
And wow, our 13th episode. Time has really flew by.
I know. Thanks to everyone who's been listening. We've had some really exciting guests on the show, including today's, and we have some really great guests coming up in the near future.
But before we go to the interview of George Strayton, we do have some news hot off the virtual presses. First up, he has a plan. Despite a very full schedule, including promoting Much Ado About Nothing and pre-production for The Avengers 2, Joss Whedon is hatching a master plan on TV. Whedon is developing a series based on Marvel's S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, Whedon told MTV, "We've already pitched it to the network with a full framework and a full cast. It's new characters. It needs to be its own thing. It needs to be adjacent to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But you don't want to do a show where you're constantly going, Iron Man just left, but he was totally here a minute ago." You want them to do their own thing. Now, Whedon described the tone of the show as a balance between the realistic and mythical elements of the Marvel Universe. Well, quote, "Well, what does S.H.I.E.L.D. have that the other superheroes don't? And that, to me, is that they're not superheroes. But they live in that universe, even though they're a big organization that lacks, or that lack of powers make them underdogs." That's interesting to me.
Yeah, actually, he seems to do that a lot. You notice that was a running theme with Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, where he kind of talks about the real heroes are the ones who kind of charge into battle without having the powers that the superheroes have. So that's kind of.
I'm looking forward to it. It could be really a cool show. Develop the S.H.I.E.L.D., espionage, counter superhero type element, and a bunch of characters that he could really, flesh out and develop brand new characters too, and characters he could kill off and do whatever he wants with.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to, I know one of my favorite shows, Supernatural. Season 8 of Supernatural is approaching. Yay! And Sam and Dean may have met their match with a sci-fi favorite who snagged a recurring role on the show, Amanda Tapping, who's best known for her roles as Samantha Carter from the Stargate franchise and Helen Magnus on Sanctuary, will play Naomi, a member of a, quote, cool and mysterious group of angels we've never seen before. She is described as a no-nonsense bureaucrat who wears a business suit and has her hair pulled back. However, Naomi is less together than she appears to be, and her efficient manner belies a deeper emotionality. Tapping will make her first Supernatural appearance during the 8th season 7th episode entitled A Little Slice of Kevin. Supernatural returns October 9th, 9 p.m. Eastern Pacific on the CW. I'm looking forward to I'm always looking forward to a new season of Supernatural. So I don't know, it's going to be kind of, I don't really know what they have planned, but with Jeremy Carver going to be at the helm, giving me some changes, and they're talking about taking it back to its roots. So that should be.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I hope it takes it some new directions. Speaking of Eric Kripke, who's not the showrunner anymore, but he is the one that created the show.
Yes.
He has his own new show that just premiered Monday called Revolution.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah, we really enjoyed the first episode. I'm really looking. I think we're both looking forward to seeing what's going to happen with it. It's kind of got an epic feel, a little different than Supernatural. So another Kripke show. See how that goes.
Yeah.
Now, meanwhile, in comic books, Marvel Comics made some buzz in the press again with their alternate timeline titles of the Ultimate version of the Ultimate Universe. Hopefully that sounds confusing.
Say that 5 times fast.
Basically, they have this whole other timeline that they brand Ultimate, where they kind of put it contemporary times, like reinvent, reboot the Marvel Universe.
Yeah.
It's been running for many years, very popular. Now, the last time they were in the news, it was for killing Spider-Man and replacing him with a biracial character. Now, this time, it's a little more political as Captain America becomes president of the United States.
Why in the world would he want that job?
I don't know. I don't think he'll
Who
last.
in their right mind would want that job?
Now, you got to keep in mind the Ultimate Universe is very different than the other Marvel Universe at this point. Very different than our universe because it's gone through a number of conflicts and disasters. Currently, Washington, D.C. has been decimated. A virtual dictator runs Detroit, and what remains is a literal West Coast nation full of fugitives. Refugees.
Refugees?
Refugees. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
I don't know.
Refugees after a major global disaster that Magneto created. So tidal waves and earthquakes. As Marvel's EEOC said, this is a United States that's been torn asunder by special interest groups, by opportunities looking to divide and conquer. This is a metaphor for what goes on in real life, but on steroids. So what kind of president will Captain America be? Well, writer Sam Humphries said, quote, "He is Abraham Lincoln if Lincoln had access to a jet plane and a devastating right hook. Captain America is not going to behave like any other president behaves. He takes the oath of office and barely takes a breath as he goes to hot spots. Cap is out there because he's so concerned about the State of the Union that he doesn't have time to think about the State of the Union." So what do you think? Cool idea, publicity stunt, or should Spider-Man have been president? That's what I think.
Do we have confirmation that Abraham Lincoln didn't have a strong right hook?
I don't know.
There wasn't that around the time that people were literally getting into fist fights and beating each other with canes on the, in Congress or on the House. So I don't know. Who knows? Maybe Abraham Lincoln was a decent fighter. Actually, I think I saw him killing zombies.
Well, lately he's been killing zombies and vampires and everything else. So
I don't know. Maybe he was that kind of president. It's a secret history. Okay, so moving on. When you hear that Hasbro has been thinking of getting another Transformers movie out by 2014, does it fill you with dread or happiness? I suspect half of our audience feels one way and the other half feels the other. So if you're looking forward to it, you may be worried about some news we've learned. Hasbro president and CEO wants more toys. Shocking. So there are rumors that there will be a complete overhaul of the cast of Autobots and Decepticons. Will this be all new characters, just new looks, or a combination? We'll have to wait and see. Gosh, they can't be any worse. I shouldn't say that, but they can't be any worse than the Transformers movies they've come out with recently. They were terrible. I couldn't even make it through the first one.
It's cool special effects, right?
Yeah, but no actual story or anything else good. But I don't know. My brother and I were talking about the new Transformers toys because he's got young kids, and when we were kids, they were these die-cast metal. Like you could throw them against a wall and you'd probably mess up the wall. And now they're plastic, and if you don't do them right, they fall right apart.
Oh yeah.
So. Man, these kids are getting cheated. We used to have decent toys that you can give your sibling a concussion just with
You used to have nice metal toys made out of lead.
Yeah, lead paint.
Good times. Now, it's never fun when a show you love gets canceled.
Oh.
Even worse when it ends with a cliffhanger. And that's an all too often scenario for genre fans. Well, Terra Nova fans are getting some help from the team behind the canceled Fox series.
Yay! I hated that was canceled. That was so wrong.
Now, the DVD collection was just released, and Fox is asking fans to come up with ideas for how the show's lingering questions could have been answered. Now, at the show's official website, fans are able to use editing software to put together a motion comic with their best idea for a grand finale. But you must have the DVD code from Season 1 DVD to participate. Fox will post the best endings in a video gallery for fans to check out. Now, here's the tagline for the contest. Would the Sixers, Lucas, and the Phoenix group have completed their secret mission, or would Commander Taylor and the Shannons have been able to win back Terra Nova for the future? And how did the wooden figurehead get there? So, how do you think the show should have ended? Do you think these kind of things are a good idea?
I think Commander Taylor could have taken them all single-handedly. Didn't you see that guy?
He's an awesome actor, yeah.
He was. And also, I was kind of curious because we know that the Commander and the Shannons were good people and wanted what was best for everybody in Terra Nova, but I was kind of interested in seeing if maybe the Sixers were going about the right thing the wrong way. maybe given enough time, the storyline would have gone in a direction where Commander Taylor and Shannon's realized that the Sixers' idea wasn't wrong, just maybe their terroristic tactics were the problem. So, I don't know. I kind of was looking forward to seeing if that was going to happen. So, okay, so moving on to a new show. The CW's Arrow is gathering together a list of familiar faces from the DC comic book world. And the guest list so far includes Deadshot, Deathstroke, China, White, and Huntress. Now we learned that the Royal Flush Gang is also going to be making an appearance. It's been confirmed that Kyle Schmidt will play Ace, one of the members of the gang. He previously starred in Sci-Fi's Being Human, Blood Ties, and BBC's Copper. Some of the guest actors include genre favorites like John Barrowman, yay, from the Doctor Who spin-off Torchwood. And yes, I love Cat and Jack. Well, they ruined Cat and Jack and Children of Earth, but don't even get me started on that. And Tomo Pinnicut from the shows Battlestar Galactica and Dollhouse. He's also good. He will play Tom Salvati, the right-hand man to Frank Bartonelli, a crime boss and the father of the Huntress. Arrow premieres October 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern Pacific on the CW. So are you excited to see the growing list of villains and guest stars on Arrow?
I am. One thing I didn't like about Smallville at first is they ignored all the villains and just created up new ones, which usually weren't as good.
Honestly, you can't have a good story without a good villain. I think you could probably get by with a weak protagonist, but if you don't have a strong antagonist, there's just no story.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Well, that's it for those.
So now let's get on with our interview with George Strayton, a screenwriter probably best known for his writing on Hercules and Xena, and he's also an award-winning role-playing game designer. So here you go. Enjoy.
So my name is George Strayton. I actually started out as a game designer for tabletop role-playing games, which you always have to say now because these days you would assume you're an MMO writer. But I actually started in the early 90s. Writing for Dungeons & Dragons and Star Wars and games like that. But eventually, in the late 90s, I had moved into doing even more intellectual properties like Men in Black and Species, Tank Girl, etc. And that led me to reading lots of scripts because we obviously had to write the games before the screenplays came out, before the movies came out. So all we had was the screenplays to work from. So I wound up really enjoying the medium and decided I wanted to be a screenwriter, and so moved from the East Coast out to Los Angeles. And there's a long story of how I got my first job, but essentially within the first year and a half of being there, I was able to, thankfully, get a job writing for one of my favorite shows, which was Xena Warrior Princess, and working with Sam. Yeah, it was great. I loved it. I specifically went to LA with the idea in mind of getting to write for that show. So, and I was also a huge Sam Raimi fan. So that was amazing to get to work with him and learn from him. So, and then from there, I continued to work in TV, and then kind of switched over to film, and have been primarily doing film since then, up to the present, where a couple of things I worked on that have come out were like the Dragonlancemovie. I did a lot of transmedia producing on some bigger films like Transformers and the newer Star Trek movie. Not the one that's coming out called Star Trek Into Darkness, but the first one that J.J. Abrams directed. And then I have some projects of my own that are in the works, and most recent of which, it was just announced, is based on a novel called, and it comes full circle, it's based on a novel called Quad Keep from 1978. That was the first official Dungeons and Dragons novel ever published, written by Andre Norton. And the interesting thing about it is that it was based on a game run for Andre by Gary Gygax.
Oh wow,
cool.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. So it all comes full circle.
Yeah, so starting, kind of the beginning of that circle, then you said you started out with, I know you think about saying tabletop because I guess we're dating ourselves. That's what I think of with role-playing. But how did you first get involved in that? Because you transitioned from there to, television and films, but how did you first get involved in the writing for the games?
That's a great question. Probably most people will relate to this. I went to college, and I'm from the East Coast. I'm from New York originally. In fact, I'm all over the place. I literally went to France. until last Monday. I am now in New York at the moment, and then I'll be back in LA. I'm constantly all over the place. But I was born in New York, which of course is the capital of the publishing industry, not the film industry.
Yeah.
So I grew up playing RPGs. So in like '78 or so, I started playing basic D&D and etc. But it was never something that was thought of by anybody that I knew as a viable career path.
Yeah, most people really wouldn't think that.
Yeah. And not even, I mean, I remember in college, in high school, even talking about wanting to be a director or a screenwriter, and that was even farther away because that's not publishing. That's, making films, and that's done in California, and that's so far away, and no one knows anybody who knows anybody who's ever done anything successfully. So I really grew up with the attitude of like, well, my three options are, getting into business, becoming a lawyer, or becoming a doctor. So that's kind of what I pursued. And my parents were very supportive of the idea of me being creative, and I attended a lot of creative, like after-school programs and that kind of thing. But it was always more like a hobby.
Yeah.
Something fun to do. And then if it ever worked out, fantastic. But, you need to have a fallback plan, and you need to have something that can sustain you financially, and if you have a family, et cetera. So no one was trying to dissuade me per se, but no one was trying to really forcefully encourage me to get involved in game design or anything of the sort. But since I was such a lover of RPGs, it kind of naturally happened because I would attend conventions as often as possible, especially once I got into college. And again, I started in 1978, so now I will really date myself. I'm on the 19th of this month of September. I'll be 42. So
happy birthday early!
Birthday.
Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, wow, it's a couple days now.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not that far away.
I'm getting old. I forget what day it is. But so I started playing D&D in about the age of 8 or so, 7 or 8, and so
that was very young.
Well,
you must have had a very good attention span for 7 or 8-year-olds.
I think it was because my best friend's brothers were both older.
Oh, yeah.
They introduced us to the game. But they introduced us in the sense that they forced us to play. But so I had always been involved in games from that point on. Like, I just loved them and played in college. And then I really started going to conventions a lot once I got to college. And so I started meeting the game companies because at the time, this is prior to this is late 80s. Basically, late 80s, very early 90s, 91 or so. So there wasn't the OGL or anything like that. So which created, in my mind, created a lot of opportunity for, combination of the open gaming license as well as print on demand and ebooks, et cetera, has created a lot of opportunity for people to develop their own games and get them out there into the world, which is great. But at the time, there were just literally, I just saw a friend of mine who came through town, who I worked with at West End Games. And we were just saying that when we were there were, like 8 or 9 companies, and that was it. It was like TSR, Chaosium, ICE, and a few West End Games, and just a few other ones. So we all knew each other. And in attending conventions, I would always, whenever a game company was there, I would go and talk with them. And in the meantime, I was always writing my own games. Because I was never satisfied. I loved D&D, and I loved playing lots of other games and top secrets, a lot of CSR games. But Iron Crown had Middle Earth role playing at the time, and so I liked lots of different kinds of games. And whenever one of those companies were at a convention, I'd go and speak to them, and I would show them, instead of doing my real job, which was just to show you the drastic difference between the two things. I was what was my title? I was a software developer for computer-based training programs for tax accountants at KPMG, which is one of the big 3 accounting firms.
Well, that sounds about as exciting as my job, I gotta tell you. I'm so sorry.
I called it, I worked there for quite a while. I called it soul crushing. So my kind of savior from that kind of milieu, that kind of environment was gaming. So I started writing my own games, and I would, just literally for myself and for my friends, and I would type them up and I would print them out. And I remember going one time to a convention, and I actually happened to have a copy of one of the games on me, one of these games I designed, and it was based on D30 because there was some contest by Zoki Games because they had come out with the D30. So I made a D30 game, and the West End guys who did Star Wars and Paranoia and a lot of great games were intrigued, and they said, "Oh, we'd love to see that." I said, "I happen to have a copy." Turned it over to them, and by the end of the weekend, they said, "You know what?" And this is after meeting a lot of game companies and seeing even the West End folks. And they were men and women. I said guys, but I really meant that not in the sense that they were all men. It was men and female designers and artists and et cetera. But I had met them a few times because they were based in the Northeast. So after seeing that I could actually produce something, which I think is very helpful if you're trying to do anything creative, is to show that you can do it, show that you can complete something. Yeah. They said, "You know what, look, this looks good. We're not going to automatically give you a job, but why don't you submit something for our magazine, for Star Wars, which was called the Star Wars Adventure Journal." And that was the beginning. I submitted an idea and got the job and was commissioned to do it on a freelance basis. I wound up doing a bunch more of that. And meanwhile, I'm working at KPMG at the time. So I'm writing, literally writing on my lunch hour, which I decided was a lunch 2 hour. And I would actually leave, go, and they had moved the executive office out of New York City and into the suburbs. So I would leave and go to a mall, into the food court, and I would write during lunch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was, I still, every once in a while when I visit my parents, go there. Kind of bizarre, but it's really where I started writing professionally. So I would do that and turn my material in, and eventually, after, say, about a year, I'd gotten more and more opportunities from them, specifically from West End Games, to the point where they started offering me things, again, on a freelance basis. And then eventually the turning point was I went, they were in Pennsylvania, so it was about a 2-hour drive from New York, and they had something crashed and burned, which happened, I discovered once I started working there, on a fairly frequent basis, because people have lives, and you can't really make a living as a game designer, tabletop game designer, although Monty Cook just made $500,000 on his Kickstarter campaign. So.
I know, I saw that.
Oh, really? That much?
Yeah.
Great guy. I've known him for a very long time, and he deserves a fantastic game designer, and I know him like something fantastic. So that's all great. I think that's awesome, and it's one of the benefits of having all these new technologies. But
yeah, I was gonna say that's something that wasn't available when you started out.
That amount of money, it's great. I think it'll be a great. Numera is the name of the game for anybody who's not familiar with it, and you should check it out. But going back to 1995, this is. Something crashed and burned at West End. They asked me to come meet with them in person, which I did. So I drove out with a friend of mine who also was a freelancer from New York, and we met with them. And just during lunch, we were there the whole day because they needed to fill us in because it had to be done very, very quickly. And they took us to lunch, and they just happened to casually ask me what my career aspirations were. And I said, "Oh, I want to be a game designer." So I didn't think any more about it. I did the project. I really got to the point where I was so sick of my soul-sucking job.
See, I shouldn't say that, but it's just been a Monday, you know?
Absolutely no. And I worked there for a total of 5 years. 2 of it was during college, but then 3 years after it. And it's just, on some days you're just like, you want to shoot yourself. It's just, you don't want to get up. You just don't want to get up. And that's how I felt. And one day, I don't know what possessed me, but I just decided I was going to quit. So I quit the job, and I had a 401k that had been building up, and I just cashed it in for money, which you're allowed to do up until 5 years, apparently.
Oh, and that's when 401ks were actually worth something.
So I cashed it in, and I lived on that while I was looking for something else. But I was really being very lackadaisical about looking for a job. I mean, I would go to interviews and I would apply and et cetera, but I would ask for so much money that I knew they would never give me the job. Do it, and I figured, well, if I have to do it, they better pay me a lot. So I had this one interview that went really well, and I left, and I came home, and I got a phone call, and a message to call back, and this is the time before everybody had a cell phone, so I literally had a phone call, like a message. So I went back to West End Games, and they said, "Look, we have a job opening. Are you interested?" I said, I was so excited I couldn't contain myself. I said, "Absolutely." And they said, "Okay, here's the only caveat. This was a Thursday. I remember this so vividly. I remember sitting on the stairs at my parents' house, actually. And they said, the only caveat is you have to show up on Monday. And this was Thursday, so I had 4 days. I had to drive out to Pennsylvania, move my whole life, find a place to live, and start working.
Wow.
And they said, really? Because you were our first choice. I said, oh. I said, well, what happened to the first two choices? They said, well, they all wanted to give 2 weeks' notice. I said, I already did that. 7th week of having given notice. And they said, well, fantastic, you're hired. And then I literally hung up the phone, and 5 minutes later I got a call from the company that I had just interviewed with that day, which was, you may have heard of them, people may have heard of them, they're called Champion Paper, but they've gone out of business, actually, because no one uses as much paper as they used to.
Oh, wow.
But it was a big paper company at the time, and this was the headquarters, and I had asked for a crazy amount of money, and they said, okay, fine. And shocked that I was like, no, I'm the job at West End Games that pays below the poverty level, and compared to this other opportunity. But I just loved it so much. I just loved games so much that I could not pass up the opportunity. And it was in Pennsylvania versus New York, so the cost of living, of course, is very different. So it wasn't as drastic as it sounds. I mean, it was like 1/3 the salary, but it wasn't as drastic as it sounds. But still was a lot more than I was used to making. But it was like I had gone to heaven. So I, packed up my car, drove out. Remember, I drove out on a Sunday, stayed with a good friend of mine who was basically the head writer. He was the creative director, was his title, of the Star Wars line. His name was Bill Smith. He worked there for a long time at West End, and I stayed with him. He was so very gracious to let me stay with him for a while I looked for an apartment. But I started on that Monday morning, and I sat down at the desk they gave me and started editing from the second I sat down. And that's sort of how I got into doing gaming, and it went from there, and I eventually worked my way up to being creative director at the company. So that's the answer to your very short question.
No, it's great.
That's cool. Now, I love West End Games because I love playing Star Wars. That's one of my favorite games of theirs. Did you ever play?
I liked playing a Wookiee.
Yeah. Did you ever work on like Torg, or which games did you work with on West End Games?
Torg basically was in its death throes when I showed up. So there were a couple of things that had, I think 2 more books that were on their way, all the way through the process to the point where they were beyond editorial. So they were either in the art department, or they were literally being printed, and that was sort of the end of Torg, unfortunately, which I actually liked.
Yeah.
I had played it quite a bit, and especially the card element. I don't know if you remember that there was this card element that were essentially dramatic effects, story-related effects that could happen during the game. And in fact, I kind of stole that idea 20 years later, I guess it is almost. And in this supplement for my own game that I have out, that's about to come out, and I have a card. But I always liked that. It was just a fun extra little thing you could do to create more story elements. I did work on Star Wars. The biggest probably the most well-known books I worked on were the final game West End produced, which was called Star Wars Second Edition Revised and Expanded, and you'll know it's the only one in full color. And the other one was called the Tales of the Jedi source book. So there was a Tales of the Jedi comic book series. Okay. So it took place based on that time period of Star Wars. Okay. And then, so non-Star Wars wise, I was actually in charge of all the other games. So Indiana Jones, Species, Tank Girl had already been done and gone when I got there. We Hercules and Xena. We did a Hercules and Xena game. I wrote a book called the D6 System Rule Book, which was basically taking this D6 system that had been used in Star Wars and before that Ghostbusters and making it modular. And this was actually in 1996. It came out in 97. So this is well before D20, but it was a kind of similar idea where people could make their own games using the D6 system. And people did. There were all these great games. And this was early in the days of people using the web to do game stuff. So I remember somebody made a Conan game, and people made all different kinds of games. It was really cool. And I transferred one of the things I was very happy about was I transferred the Indiana Jones game over to the D6 system as an option. I didn't, you could still play. You have Master Book, which was the Torg system. But my feeling was the people who played Star Wars, which obviously was our biggest fan base, the next game they were most likely to play of ours was Indiana Jones. So I figured, well, we might as well make the barrier to entry as low as possible. So let's make a D6 version of the game. So if you played Star Wars, you can really easily transition over. So we put stats for both systems in all the books from that point onward. And then I can't remember if I mentioned it, but Men in Black.
We played that.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed working on it. In fact, that's the game that really led me to want to be a screenwriter. I read the script, and I just loved the movie so much. By the end of that story, which is just the following, that I worked on basically every game that wasn't Star Wars.
Okay.
And in Black specifically was the game that led me, when I read the script, what led me to want to be a screenwriter and transition out of gaming. Not fully, I still love gaming and was always going to play games and always have played games, and actually still did freelance game work, but really made me excited about wanting to be involved in the film business.
Cool. Now, I'm curious, when you said you had to read the scripts before you made the games, I guess because of the timing of the movies, I know scripts can change a lot. Was there any major changes that kind of gave you guys little snafus or something when you made the games? That's actually an excellent question. I'm trying to think. Not that I recall, actually. If it had been Men in Black 2, then there would have been major changes. That script I know changed drastically, but Men in Black 1 was pretty much as written, and everything else was pretty close. I mean, their final drafts were pretty close to the movie. Nothing that would affect the game itself. And every once in a while, if they had some small change, we could catch it and just fix a paragraph here or there right before it went to print. So because by the time the game was written, laid out, all the artwork done, and ready to go to the printer, now we're getting really close to the release time of the movie. So, and they've locked the picture. So if they've made changes, we know what they are. We had let's say a few days to a week to make any last minute changes, and we may have done that here and there, but I don't remember anything that we freaked out about that was a major problem.
Now, getting to work with those, reading those scripts and getting those ahead of time, is that how were you able to make some contacts then so that you could make the transition into screenwriting?
Actually, yes. In fact, that's one of the major ways that I was able to do it. We tried to get a lot of different licenses over time. West End Games, I mean, as you probably know, was mostly, well, by the 1990s anyway, was mostly known for doing games based on intellectual properties in film, film and TV. Prior to that, they did a lot of original stuff like Torg, Paranoia for RPGs, and then prior to that, even board games and war games like Junta was one of their most popular games. But while I was there, it was all based on movies and television shows. So, for example, I went out and pitched to get the license for X-Files.
I love X-Files.
Yeah, me too. It was one of my favorite shows, and this was 1995, so it was really at its height. Yeah. We wound up not getting a license for whatever reason, but one of the ones I did we did get from a meeting I had was Hercules and Xena, which were two of my favorite shows at the time. So I was very excited. It was at Universal Studios, and I was really nervous. I flew out to LA, and I had to meet with the person in charge of giving out the licenses. And I just remember being very nervous because we hadn't gotten X-Files, even though we had this whole presentation binder and this whole presentation, put together, and we didn't get it. So here we go again, and I meet with him, and after about 10 minutes, he says, can you just stop for a minute? And he pulls out from inside his desk a copy of the most recent Star Wars rule book. He's like, can you sign this for me? And I was like kind of bewildered for a second, and turned out he was a huge gamer. In fact, before working at Universal, he owned a game store.
Oh, wow.
And his name, I'm sure he won't mind my saying this, his name is Steve Booth. He was wound up becoming one of my best friends. Just a terrific guy, huge gamer. In fact, we became roommates eventually, but he became my contact. We got the license, of course, and he became my main contact at Universal, which is where Hercules and Xena was written. Not shot. It was shot in New Zealand, but it was written on the Universal Studios lot. And so I used to visit him as much as possible, and he would always give me access to go read the scripts, like older scripts of the show, or watch dailies from upcoming episodes, or whatever I needed. He was very, very helpful, and he and I figured out a way I could sneak onto the lot, so I didn't have to call him all the time. So you used to be able to go into. If anybody who lives in LA will know this road. It's called Lancashire. It goes right past the main entrance to Universal. But there was a credit union there. You could go in the front doors, go up the elevator to the roof. You go to the top floor, take stairs to the roof, cross over to another roof, and come down some stairs into the elevator and down, and you were inside the lot at Universal.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So I basically wound up. From having that opportunity, I could be there whenever I wanted to. And I just spent as much time as I could there, and I just met as many people as I could. And literally one day I was over at the Renaissance Pictures offices, and that was the company that did Hercules and Xena. It was Sam Raimi and Rob Tapert, their production company. And they did, the Army of Darkness movies. Well, she called them the Evil Dead movies.
Yeah.
I think Army of Darkness is probably the least liked of all of them. And I was a big fan of the Evil Dead movies as well. So one day I was over there to look at some scripts, and this guy named Brad saw me in the hallway. He said, "Hey, do you want some cake? We're having a party. I give in my notice. I'm moving on to bigger and better things. I'm very excited." It's like, sure, I like cake.
Who doesn't?
Who doesn't? Yeah.
Hey, free cake, okay. So I went in and I met a bunch of people, and as I was leaving, I said, "Oh, Brad, by the way, do you have a replacement lined up?" And he said, "No." And I said, I actually think I would make a good candidate for your position. He said, "Oh, great. When you get home, just, this is in the days like when everything was faxed. He's like, fax me your resume, and I'll take a look at it." I said, "Great, excellent." So I went home, and I called Steve Booth. And I said, "Hey, Steve, do you know Brad?" He's like, "Yeah, I know Brad." I said, "What does Brad do?" He's the director of marketing. I said, "Oh, okay." So I fudged my resume. And I did know, obviously I knew about merchandising because we were on the receiving end of merchandising. So I did know quite a bit about that. And I knew a lot about the shows because I was writing the game at the time. So I literally watched every episode. And that was very important to them. And I, just kind of talked about marketing in terms of marketing we did at West End Games and that kind of thing. But when I had my interview, I got interviews, and I had two, and strangely enough, they never asked me any marketing questions. All the questions were about the show, because they had done at the time, I think 108 episodes between the two shows. So there was a lot to know, and the main responsibility of the job was continuity. So continuity across publicity, promotions, merchandising, and marketing. So you had to know the tone of the show. You had to know what was going to be approved. For example, Lucy Lawless, who's, by the way, just super nice. She's so nice. She's such a great person. But she had the right to reject any image of her that she didn't, if she wasn't happy with it, on any merchandise. So I had to get to know what she liked and what she didn't like. I mean, there were pictures of her that I thought that looked great, but she, for whatever reason, she wouldn't like. And I developed a sense of what that was. So it was all about, they wanted somebody who really was, could represent the show to all of the other departments. So I would read all the novels, for example, and I'd say, oh, well, in the show, yes, we do have a tongue-in-cheek attitude for this show, and it's very campy, et cetera, but this goes a little bit too far, or this needs more of that, or, okay, you're doing a Frisbee, that's great, it's cool to have a Xena one, but you probably should have a Gabrielle one also, because both for sales reasons, but also political reasons, because we like Renee O'Connor, who played Gabrielle, just as much as we like Lucy. So, they want somebody who could be an advocate for the show.
So really, your job was to be the Uber fan.
And I was. So.
Yeah, well, no one really knows the show as well as the fans. Usually, the fans know more than the people making them.
So eventually, I became a writer on the shows, and I started on Hercules, but. The last season of Xena, they had a lot of financial trouble. This is just has to do with the studio, not Xena itself. And the studio wound up getting sold. So a bunch of things were going on. So they had to cut back on a lot of things. So they got rid of all the writers who were on the show before that, including, and they brought in they kept the head writer, and they brought in one new writer who was a fan fiction writer.
Oh, wow. So,
she had no credits of any kind, but she was a huge fan of the show. She knew every episode that had been done. She was very familiar with the characters, so she came on board and obviously for a lower salary, but she was very happy to get the job. So I think everybody was happy, with the arrangement. I mean, I wasn't excited to not get to work on the last season of the show.
You weren't happy, but
I loved it, but. I love the show, but for the people who worked on it, I think they were all very happy. But it just goes to show, you never know what can happen. If you love something, you never know where it will lead you. It could lead you to the thing that you think could never happen, like being the person who's creating that thing that you love so much.
Now, what was the favorite episode of Hercules or Xena that you wrote? What was your favorite?
That's a great question. Well, Hercules is easy. There was an episode. I think it was the last episode of season 4. Let me think. The last episode of season 4 or 5. I don't remember now. God, I can't believe how long ago the show was on. 15 years ago. So it was last episode of season 4 or 5. I think 5, because it only had one more season after that, which I wrote on, and then I moved over to Xena. So must have been last of episode 5, and it was that entire season. The Hercules' sidekick Aeolus in the first episode of the season had been killed, and this was done just to give you an example of how things kind of happen in Hollywood or in the studio system. Xena was starting to kick the butt of Hercules in ratings. Trying to figure out, well, why is that? And Xena was a spinoff of Hercules. Had been in 3 episodes of Hercules as Xena, and so everybody was wondering why that was, especially Kevin Sorbo. He was like, "Are you guys spending more time on that show than my show? Like, what's going on?" And so somehow the decision was made. You know what? The show is not dark enough. We need, Xena had this kind of edge, and we need to add that. So let's try a season where we add that. So. The guys who were the head writers at the time, who've gone on to do a lot of great things, and they are Alex Kurtzman and Bob Orsi. Roberto, he goes by Roberto Orsi. They did Alias, and they did Fringe and Hawaii Five-0, and then in film they did Star Trek and Transformers and Cowboys and Aliens and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, that is a lot, yeah.
They're great. So they said, all right, if we're making the show darker, we'll have his best friend be killed at the beginning, the first episode of the season, and he'll have to deal with that for the rest of the season. And he'll blame himself for it happening. even though where it's not really clear if it was his fault or not, because there were certain unwritten rules about the shows that we had to follow. That's a whole other discussion, but I'll skip it for the moment. But we had some unwritten rules that one of them was that no one could intentionally do something that would hurt somebody. They could do it if it was for the greater good. If it was going to help in a way that was even better, but they couldn't just hurt somebody because they were having a bad day, kind of thing. So anyway, the point is that the whole season, Hercules misses his best friend. He goes on this whole quest. He kind of to find himself and to deal with this loss. And the final episode was we bring Aeolus back from Hades, essentially. Well, not even essentially, literally back from Hades, because the apocalypse is happening, and he gets sent back because none of the gods want the apocalypse to happen, because that'll mean the end of the earth, and that'll mean the end of their fun playing with the humans, the human population. So Hades, the god, sends Aeolus back to help Hercules figure out how to stop the apocalypse from happening. So that was my favorite episode of Hercules, because it was a reunion of these two characters who had been through 4 seasons together. And by the way, that character of Aeolus wasn't gone from the show that whole time. We used him in kind of strange and weird ways. We had an episode set in modern day called Yes, Virginia, There Is a Hercules, and Yes, Virginia, There Is a Hercules 2. But maybe it'll encourage fans to go check them out. They're really fun. I didn't write them, so I'm not tooting my own horn. In fact, Bob and Alex wrote them. They're really ingenious. I would recommend anybody I believe, I'm 99% sure if you have Netflix, you can stream them. So if you can look for Yes, Virginia, There Is a Hercules, check it out. It's a really fun episode set in modern day, but with all the actors from the show playing, and this is, maybe nobody knows this, they're playing actual people from the writing staff and the producing staff.
Oh, really?
So the names of the show are the names of the actual people who worked on the show.
Oh, I like that.
This was on Hercules. This is when I was still doing marketing. So I joined in the middle of that year on the writing staff. So, but it was great. So, yeah, that was my favorite episode of Hercules for sure. Favorite episode of Xena, 100th episode. It was called Seeds of Faith. And by the way, the episode of Hercules that was my favorite episode was called Revelations.
Okay.
And it was a double entendre. It had a double meaning is probably a better way of saying it. It was revelations about what had really happened to Hercules' sidekick, but also referring to in the Bible the Book of Revelations and the Apocalypse. So that was the name of that one. And then the Xena episode was called Seeds of Faith, Seeds, and it was the episode where it's revealed that I was going to say Lucy, but because Lucy was actually pregnant at the time, it's an episode where it's revealed that Xena is pregnant, which we did because Lucy was pregnant, and it was starting to show. So there's no way we could get away with. We couldn't do any more shots where you just see her from, you see her from the chest up and that's it.
And you can't really tell her to suck it in, you know what I mean?
No. After a certain point, and she was a trooper. I mean, literally, she worked as much as and as long as she could. She was amazing. But at a certain point, we had to be like, okay, we have to make her pregnant. I mean, there's no other way around it, which was cool. Like, you want things like that because it stretches you and, like, makes the show different. And so it was a great opportunity to do something interesting. So it was an episode where we do 2 things. One, the positive one was that we reveal Xena is pregnant. And the negative one was we had a character named Eli who was not created by me but by another writer and had been in several episodes. And the actor's gone to do a lot of work. You'll see him around. His name is Timothy Oliphant. He had been playing this figure who was kind of like a Gandhi / Jesus sort of figure who was very peace-oriented and that sort of thing. But you weren't quite sure if he was a charlatan or not. But Xena and Gabrielle become friends with him, so they had come to like him. And so when your heroes like somebody, the audience then likes them. And so you got, even though other people in the show still thought he was a charlatan, the audience believed that he was a real deal. And in that episode, he gets killed. So even though he gets killed, it turns out Xena's pregnant. So it was kind of this really interesting, bittersweet episode. So that one I really enjoyed writing. And we gave Gabrielle, Renee O'Connor really wanted to do more. She always played like the sweet person in the duo, and she wanted to have more range. She was a very dedicated actress. And she wanted to expand her range and do more. So she wanted to show anger and some other emotions that she didn't normally get to show. So we really gave her a very dark episode. And again, Lucy was pregnant at the time, so she couldn't be in any fight scenes, or she could be in like one fight scene, but it mostly had to be her stunt double instead of 3 fight scenes, which was the average. And she could only be in, I think, a third of the show in general. And in fact, we got we got a lot. It was one of the highest rated episodes of the show, but we did get complaints that Lucy wasn't in the show enough. So
it was biology, not you.
yeah. But what can you do? But I really enjoyed writing it, and I really enjoyed seeing what Lucy is always great, but it was really great seeing Renee O'Connor play Gabrielle, do more things, like get to do more, to exercise her acting chops. And she was great. I love her performance in that episode. So I wish she was doing more stuff. I haven't seen anything with her in it recently, but I hope she is, because she was great. So those are my 2 favorite episodes of those 2 shows. I actually did one other Sam Raimi show as a freelancer, which was called Cleopatra 2525.
Oh yeah.
It only lasted, I think, 1 season or 2 seasons maybe. It was a sci-fi show, and it just didn't work. I wrote 2 episodes, and only 1 was filmed, because the show just wasn't working. So I don't have a favorite episode of that one. Just to cut you off from asking me that.
The one that was made was your favorite.
Like, yeah.
Yes, the fact that it actually got made was my favorite.
I do kind of remember Cleopatra 25.
Yeah, because it was back to back with another show, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. So the other show was called Jack of All Trades, and it starred Bruce Campbell. And that show, actually, I really liked. It was really fun, and, by the way, interestingly, the head writers of that show were Bob and Alex, who had been the head writers of Hercules and Xena. So
that was a good team.
Yeah, they definitely know what they're doing.
And that was almost kind of like in the heyday of a lot of sci-fi and fantasy.
Sci-fi syndication was huge.
Yeah.
It was huge. I mean, you had Sinbad, Conan, all that stuff.
I really do miss those days, because, I mean, you just, as a geek, you just pretty much knew you could turn on the TV at some point, and especially at night, and find something you liked.
It is very, very true, and they don't do as much anymore. And interestingly, the Sci-Fi Channel, I mean, okay, it's called the Sci-Fi Channel, but they do not want to do anything fantasy.
Right.
But I feel like people who like sci-fi tend to like both. So it would be nice to get them to do some fantasy
look
stuff.
At Game of Thrones, how huge that is.
Yeah,
that's a good example, actually. Or even something like Rome.
Oh yeah.
Even though that's much more of a drama and
Spartacus.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's funny you mentioned. So Spartacus.
I love Spartacus.
And that's Rob Tappert and Sam Raimi again. Here's something. Here's another Hollywood thing. The studio, they said, yeah, well, great, we're excited to do the show. We have one stipulation: no one who wrote or directed Xena or Hercules can work on this show.
Huh.
On which show?
Spartacus.
Ah.
The reason was that they didn't want it to be campy. As if we only knew how to do camp.
Yeah.
So, and what was even worse is that Rob and Sam had both directed episodes of Xena and Hercules, so they weren't allowed to work on it either.
Oh my gosh.
That's odd.
That is weird.
It's crazy, but they still oversee the show. It's their show.
Yeah.
I mean, what you see is, that passes by them. So that's why it's still good. But I would have loved to work on that show. It's a great show. But you're right. There's just not the same number of them at all. Not even close as there were. I mean, and that also was the era of X-Files, Buffy, Angel.
Oh yeah.
All those great shows, Joss Whedon shows. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, we have Fringe. I think it got canceled.
I think it's the last season.
I think.
This is going to be the last season.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know what, and they actually, Bob, I don't know if you heard this, but so Bob and Alex now are pitching a new show that's based on the Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I did hear about that.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, that's literally. So I was born in New York City, but I grew up in the suburbs, and Sleepy Hollow is literally right across the Hudson River from where I grew up. So I grew up with Sleepy Hollow was a big deal.
You guys had some scary campfire stories then, didn't you?
I was in scouting, and they would scare the heck out of us. I mean, at night in the woods. I mean, we had this one scout leader. I don't know how he did it. He was just so good at telling a story. And he was this big guy, shaved head, and then he would be by the firelight, so his face would be lit up from beneath, and we're 13 or something. And I would be, why are you telling us this before we have to sleep in the woods?
That's why.
But I think that was probably one of the formative things that led me to want to do that to other people.
I halfway suspect the reason they do that is to make sure the kids don't wander off by themselves in the night in the woods.
Quite possibly.
I never thought about that, but I think you're right.
It's let's make sure we don't lose one. If you go out there, they'll take your head.
That's pretty much what it was like. Yeah, actually, I would not be surprised.
Well, you can tell I'm like an aunt. I'm like, and then if you scare the kids and then send them home.
Yes, I know. I have a niece and a nephew. I have two nieces and two nephews, and so yeah, that is true. Although I don't know if I would be so inhumane. Well, I guess I was old, and they're only kids. They're much younger, but
yeah. Well, if you're like us, when they're real young, your job is basically to fill them full of sugar, caffeine, shake them up, and send them home.
I like that. I'm gonna write that down and tell my wife. Our checklist.
Yeah, just make sure they're as wired as can be, and then you send them home.
I really hope my brother and my sister-in-law and my other brother-in-law and sister-in-law don't listen to this.
We've got 4 nephews and 4 nieces, and they all know. So that's what we do.
Hey, I love them. I love having nephews and nieces. It makes it really easy because you can send them home.
You're listed as a transmedia producer, like for Transformers and Star Trek.
So explain what that is.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know what transmedia even is. So what exactly do you do as a transmedia producer?
Well, 2 things. One is quick, which is that the actual title, transmedia producer, is it was about 3 years ago or so that the Producers Guild of America, everybody's got their guild, Writers Guild, Screenwriters, etc. Producers Guild of America decided
Warcraft with the guild.
They decided it would be the first new producerial title in 40 years or something, some crazy number. And it's all in response to multimedia. So basically the internet, anything digital, social media, the digital. So what the job is, it can take on a variety of aspects, but primarily what you're doing is you're taking the intellectual property that is the movie or the TV show, and you're expanding it across other media. And I use the word media because it's both online, so it could be, let's say, a game. That would be a really simplistic one, or just like bios of characters. That'd be super simplistic, and no one even If you're doing that, you're way behind the times. Nobody's doing that anymore. That was like in the very beginning. But you're doing stuff online, but some stuff you're doing offline. So I'll give you an example, or I'll give you two examples. One that I didn't work on, which was through working with Bob and Alex, I got to work with some other great people like J.J. Abrams and Damon Lindelof, who J.J. met Bob and Alex through Alias because J.J. was the executive producer and Bob and Alex were the head writers. They formed a fast friendship, and then Damon was friends with J.J. I believe that's how that happened, and then J.J. and Damon did Lost together, and then all four of them together worked on Star Trek and the new Star Trek coming out. So I got to know this other group of guys. And they did Cloverfield, obviously. And they did a really massive viral marketing campaign, and to the point where they actually shot a commercial for the soft drink for the fake company, the fake soft drink for the fake company that the main character was leaving to go work for in Japan, which is why he was having the party that night that Cloverfield takes place. And they bought airtime on real networks and aired the commercial and didn't anywhere brand it Cloverfield. And they created they put a website, and they made a website that was for this fake company and fake product, Slusho, which was also in Lost. But it was across the spectrum. And on Star Trek, for example, we did a lot of different things. So on one end of the spectrum, I did a lot of story writing. So basically figuring out, okay, we're going to do this viral and traditional marketing campaign. What's the story here? How can we get people involved in Star Trek before the movie comes out in some way? And JJ had two things that he wanted us to make sure that we kept in mind. One was Star Trek is our future. So the idea was, this isn't some weird world that we're not going to be a part of. This is where we're headed. So we are going to eventually have Starfleet and et cetera. So he wanted to ground it that way. And the other one was the future is now was his other thing. And I don't even know how he came up with that and exactly what he meant, other than he wanted people who were going to go watch the movie to feel like they could influence the film. So, if you've seen the film, the idea is how the crew gets together. But it's an alternate timeline. So, the old Spock knows that it's the wrong crew. The crew isn't getting together, and he needs to make sure they do. So, I then had to create a story that backtracked to the earlier time period where the timeline goes askew, and old Spock, who was called in the script, I don't remember if he was called it in the movie, but in the script he was called Spock Prime. So old Spock had to come up with a plan to get the crew back together, and so none of this is in the movie. This is all of this storyline that we created and did this viral campaign based upon. So he figured out a way to, since he time traveled into his past, he figured out a way to then send messages back to the year at the time, it was 2009. So he figured out how to send messages back to 2009 and say, if you do this, if you do X, Y, and Z, that will help the crew of the Enterprise, the real crew, the crew that should be the crew, come together. So you, as a fan of the show, can influence bringing these people together. So there were these little hints about what was going to be in the movie, and so if you got involved, it was this almost like a giant alternate reality game. So if you followed along, when you got to the movie, you actually knew a bunch of stuff that no one else knew, but if you didn't know it, it didn't detract from your watching of the movie, but if you did know about it, it added to your viewing of the movie. And then we came up with a storyline for the comic books, and we worked with all the other vendors. So that was all on one end. That was all story-based. And then the opposite end, the other extreme, was we did because JJ wanted. Oh, that's right. The third thing that JJ wanted was Star Trek is cool. Star Trek is cool. It's not just for this very specialized audience who would always like Star Trek. It's for everybody. It's mainstream. So we did these parties, Star Trek parties, and we literally had like Orion slave girls, but they would be like super hip clubs, and it would be all like secretive, and you had to get an entry, it was like a secret entry card, and it was hard to get, and it was very exclusive, and it was free, but everything was expensive. We spent money, and it was to get people who might normally bypass Star Trek because like, I don't go for that kind of stuff, to go like, oh, really? This is somehow related to Star Trek? Drinking and all that? Okay.
I like drinking. I must like Star Trek.
And obviously they did really go a long way to trying to make the new incarnation of Star Trek have that element. I mean, the big Kirk fight scene in the bar, is there's moments of that throughout the different series, especially one of my favorite episodes of Next Generation is when, I don't know if you remember this, young Picard in a fight with these guys. I can't remember the name of the alien species, but he gets knifed in the heart.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
And so it's a young Picard. I loved the episode, but it took place in a bar, and he gets knifed in the heart because he's too arrogant and prideful, and he won't back down. He's kind of got to learn his lesson. And I always loved that. So when Bob and Alex wrote that into that kind of idea into the script, and by the way, Bob is a huge Star Trek fan. So that he's read every novel. I mean, I don't mean he's just watched all the shows. He has read every novel, every comic book. He's watched every episode of the old animated series. He knows everything. So yeah, you could ask him any question, he could answer it about Star Trek. He really was like the rudder, okay, can we do this? No, in Star Trek, computers talk to you. You don't have to talk in type, or whatever. That's like a really simple one, or he'd have really esoteric ones that'd be like Easter eggs for fans of novels and whatnot. So there's actually stuff in there. If you're a big fan, you'll find like even more stuff kind of hidden in there that just goes over the heads of everybody else. But yeah, it's still evolving. Transmedia producing. It's what it isn't is making a show for the internet. That's producing. You're a producer. That's just the distribution model is different. Transmedia producing is taking something for film, TV, or the internet and expanding on it in different ways, whether it's digital or traditional. So that's basically what it is. It's really a wide array of things, but you're contributing something to the intellectual property itself. You have to be very familiar with whatever the show or movie is in order to work on it. So, and you can even contribute ideas back to them. So it's great. It's a great emerging field, and there's not a lot of people who do it. And it's also a good way to, if you want to get into screenwriting, directing, producing, or studio executive, etc., it's a good way to get involved because there's a great call for it because, the internet explodes, like every day it's twice as big, and there's more and more bandwidth and 4G and etc. So there's more and more stuff being done to market films in new ways, films and TV in new ways. So I would highly recommend it to anybody, and I would bet that if they don't offer it already, they're going to start offering transmedia producing courses in various colleges. So I think it's in Hollywood, it's the place to be right now, especially if you can make a whole career. It pays well. I'll tell you what. I'll give you an example. And this is years ago. Transformers 1. For say 4 months of work, I think it paid like $20,000.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's and it wasn't full time. I maybe spent half my time on it, something like that. So it pays well. I don't think as a PA, production assistant kind of job where you're just getting coffee, and which was has always been and still is a traditional route for getting into film and TV. So this is a new way that I think is good because you get to be creative. You're still the low person on the totem pole, but you get paid well.
Yeah.
So it's actually a really good new way. I think it's exciting, and there's always new technologies. So you can be on the cutting edge and go like, hey, we can use Tumblr. And if you're in a meeting and you're trying to get a job like this, and you say, oh, and we should use Facebook and Google Plus and Tumblr, and they're like, wait, what's Tumblr? Like, oh, that's great. Like, you want them to not know something. Because we need this person because they're way ahead of us. So it's great to stay up on what's and Tumblr's old now, so that's just an example. But you really can impress those people just by being aware of what the newest things are that people are into. So.
Oh, cool. Well, tonight I'm going to look up transmedia producing jobs and try to get one.
I can barely use a cell phone, so
She's not so much into that. I work. Well, we both do, but I more so producing.
He does the technical aspect
on web series
more.
and have a computer degree. So.
I almost got a computer degree. I left a master's degree. I left with 2 classes remaining. And that's when I was taking it at night when I was working at KPMG. But so my wife and I have a similar relationship. She's also creative. She's a musician primarily, but on Transformers 2, they wanted 2 voices, so I got the studio to hire her to be the other writer.
Oh, that's cool.
Huh.
The tech stuff, although eventually, and you would obviously, too, as it goes along, you kind of pick it up and you're able to do everything eventually. But at the beginning, like, I was handling the tech stuff and writing, and she was just primarily writing. But by the end, she could post her own stuff or, do whatever she needed to do. But you don't have to be a tech person. It's the idea. The idea. They want a good idea, and that they have web people, do all that stuff. If you can do both, fantastic. And you can talk to the web people and tell them exactly what you want. But just because I don't want people to think that if you're not tech savvy, it's not a potential career path. You could be on either side of that equation, and you could do well.
I do want to touch on a couple of your projects just happened or fairly recently, or they're in development, like your role-playing game Secret Fire and the movie that you've been developing, Xombie.
Zombie with an X.
With an X.
Yeah.
Everything's cool with an X.
It is.
If you could tell us just a little bit about those 2.
Sure. So very quickly, the Secret Fire. It's a tabletop role-playing game. It's obviously a fantasy game. The objective for me was, it's not my career to own a game company and be a business person. So I'm doing it because I enjoy it. So I'm not trying to compete with anybody. And I think people should play whatever game they enjoy. I don't partake in the edition wars or any of that kind of stuff. I try to stay out of that. So it wasn't. I wasn't trying to make a retro clone or do one of those kind of things. What I wanted to do was take what I learned in screenwriting and storytelling in general and bring it into your kind of traditional Dungeons and Dragons is probably the most classic version of this. Exploration / combat, treasure gaining, level advancing kind of game system. So I'd never seen it really done in the way that I wanted to do it. I mean, I'd played Amber Diceless role playing, and I'd played Vampire, and they were all sort of 2 ends of the spectrum. And I was trying to find something that was in the middle. So I just spent a lot of time. I always played D&D as my fantasy game of choice. So I had just kept, over time, kept adding in these house rules, and eventually what I came out with was a mechanical system of how to incorporate role-playing. So basically the game is very flavor-oriented, meaning you can read the book and enjoy reading the book. It's not just a bunch of math. It's meant for you to be able to sit down and enjoy reading it. I'll give you one example. Like the equipment chapter is written from the point of view of the person who's this hired adventurer trying to sell you the gear and convince you that you need it or you're going to die. Everything.
Good sales tactic.
Yes.
But it's fun to read. Like the idea is it's fun to read. And then the gameplay aspect that's role playing is that the more you role play, the more energy points you build up, and the more energy points you have, the more cool stuff you can do. And the cool stuff is not just relegated to combat. It's anything. It could have to do with magic. It could have to do with simply exploration, like double marching, or it's basically like anything you would use literally your actual physical energy to do, whether it's mental energy or physical energy, whatever would be taxing or draining. It allows you to do that kind of thing. So the more you role play, the more you can do in a given game. So that was sort of the emphasis of the game. And very quickly we have a game screen out, and the next book is about to come out. I think it's because we're this little nano press, I have a lot of leeway. But I think October 1st, and we had a great team of people, including Ed Greenwood, who invented Forgotten Realms, and Logan Bonner, who's written for a lot of different games, including D&D and Dragon Age. Thomas Reed, who's an old TSR guy. He's not old, I don't mean to say it, but he's a veteran TSR guy. Michael Curtis, who is one of the old school Renaissance guys, and a couple other guys and myself that has more options for games. And I'm bringing this all up because it adds a card element to the game. So that's the tie back to the Torg. So that's basically the Secret Fire in a nutshell. And it's actually, the name comes from, it's the name of my production company, my film production company, is the Secret Fire.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Secret Fire Films. So I figured, well, Secret Fire Games would be so, and then I was using a different name at the beginning, and after long discussions with people, including my wife, who's not particularly a gamer, but not an anti-gamer at all. She plays once in a while. Between her and a bunch of people, they said, no, we prefer the Secret Fire as the name of the game. So we think you should use that, and that's where the name came from. So I'm excited about it. I'm happy with the way it came out, and it is a hobby. I do it for the love of doing it. But we have a few more after this one supplement I just mentioned. We have an adventure coming out written by Steve Winter, a guy on Top Secret, Basic D&D, you name it, from back in the day all the way through today, and a couple of other things that I won't even bring up just yet because it's a little early. But we'll probably have 3 products a year or something, whatever I can handle, and they'll always be available like as PDFs or print on demand. It's never going to be I'm not trying to compete with Paizo or WotC or Goodman Games, and all of them I've worked for, except for, I guess I haven't worked for Paizo technically, although I'm friends with the guys there and Lisa Stevens, who's just super nice. But that's the Secret Fire role-playing game.
Very cool. And how's Xombie going?
Yeah.
It's based on there is a graphic novel, but the graphic novel is actually based on a Flash animated series. So that was the initial creative genesis of the property. And you can go to Zombified, again with an X, as you pointed out, zombifiedx.com, and you can watch all of them. And you can actually get a DVD of them all assembled because they're like 5 minutes a piece. And then there's a full-length version of it put together on DVD you can buy. And they have action figures. It became really popular. They have action figures, and they have not graphic novels, but they have novels as well, and all kinds of stuff, shirts and whatever. It's a really fun project. In a nutshell, it's about the first superhero zombie. So.
Sorry, that just made me laugh.
It's got a lot of comedy in it, but it's not like Shaun of the Dead. It's not that kind of comedy. It's more like a Men in Black kind of comedy. And it's basically about a guy who wakes up, realizes he's a zombie, craves craves brains, of course. But he's sentient. Like, he actually can think, and he runs into these other zombies. Every other zombie he runs into is like your normal zombie who's brainless, essentially. Just craves brains, and that's all that's going on up there. So he's trying to figure out why he's different, and he has to hook up with this college-age young woman, and the two of them who has her own set of problems and no one to turn to, and the two of them have to work together to figure out what's going on. And set in New Orleans, because we wanted to help out the city after Katrina, and this is how we started working on it. So it's set in Katrina, and it winds up. This is not giving away anything, but Katrina is as an aspect of the film. So in terms of its status, we have we had Kirsten Orsi working on it for a long time. They're kind of, it's a back burner thing. They've got a lot of other things that they're working on, like the Sleepy Hollow thing, plus all the things that everybody knows about already. But we do now have a director. His name is Stephen Goldman, who did a movie called Trailer Park of Terror, which, as you can imagine, is a horror movie. And he's a really super nice guy, and so all the producing people are. I was gonna say all the producing people are doing their jobs and finding the financing, but I'm technically a producer on the movie. I forgot. The word producer can be used for so many different things. So there's the producers who actually have to do with money and logistics, and then there's the creative producers. So I'm a creative producer. I don't do any of that stuff. So I'm a co-executive producer, but I just get involved when there's story work to be done. So I'm not writing anything actively. I'm just waiting. I'm just in a waiting mode while they hammer all of that out, and hopefully it'll all be gotten together. I want it all to happen in 2013, just because it's year is 13. So just feel like that's appropriate. So we'll see. I mean, there's some scary parts, but it's a fun movie. It's meant to be a fun but not comic movie, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
Where can people find your projects? Is there any websites they can go to?
Yeah, there are two places you can go to with regard to screenwriting and anything transmedia producing, any of that sort of thing. You can just look me up on IMDb, George Strayton, Strayton, and you'll find me there. Or IMDb Pro, you'll find more information. And then on the other side of things, in terms of game design, you can go to our gaming website, which is www.secretfiregames.com, or just search for us on Facebook, and you can find us there as well. So those are the three main places where you can find out what's going on with me.
Fantastic. Well, please keep us updated on your projects.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you some more.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much for having me.
So that's it for our 13th episode of Genretainment.
Before we go, we'd just like to let you know about our web series, Reality on Demand, and you can find it at realityondemandseries.com.
And don't forget to check out our Genretainment archive shows. We have fun shows with guests that have worked on a wide range of movies, TV shows, books, comic books, and web series like today, and other shows like Alphas, Friday the 13th, G.I. Joe, Primeval, Forgotten Realms, Continuum, Black Box TV, Journey Quest, Drifter, and many more. And also, of course, thanks to George for agreeing to interview. We wish him luck with his future projects. It was fun chatting with him.
Yes, absolutely. He has a lot of experience, and he really knows his stuff. So we're taking next week off for some other projects that we're working on. But in 2 weeks, join us on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Central, and we'll be back with another fun interview and more news. So, auf Wiedersehen. Ciao.
Adios. Have a good night, everyone.
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather.